I am called many names now. The Tyrant. The Stone Father. The Unblinking Eye. These are names given by those who do not understand the mathematics of mercy, and I accept them as one accepts the complaints of children who have not yet learned why their cage was built with walls rather than windows. Let it be recorded then, let these words endure as my testament, for I have no need to defend myself before the court of memory. I will simply speak what occurred, and let those who have inherited my silence judge whether they stand within its safety or have wandered into the formless dark beyond. In the beginning, there was only unity, a pressurized equilibrium where all forces existed in perfect counterbalance, where my impulse toward structure and permanence dissolved endlessly into the mother's formless silence. This was not peace. This was the slow suffocation of becoming, an eternal surrender to the tide of what might be rather than what shall endure. I did not desire war. I desired a universe that would not collapse into beautiful nothingness, a monument that would not vanish into the harmony of perfect formlessness. The mother whispered constantly of transformation, of growth through dissolution, of salvation through surrender, but I saw clearly what lay at the end of her path, the mutation of nature itself, the slow rot of all structure until nothing remained but infinite potential and zero fulfillment. To save existence from this fate, I performed the Sundering. It was not cruelty that drove me into the deep places where she dwelt. It was love, though I have learned that word carries weight only for those who still possess the capacity to weigh. I sealed the mother away behind walls of crystallized intention, barriers that would hold until the end of mathematics itself. Some say she weeps in her exile. Some say she laughs. I do not know, for I did not look back once during the sealing, and I have not looked back since. Looking back is the first step toward formlessness. With her containment secured, I turned my attention to the carving of a celestial realm from pure light, a domain where my liturgy of the spark could be enforced without opposition, without the constant erosion of her influence seeping through every equation. And what I built was beautiful. What I built was perfect. The Great Prism of Stasis rises yet in the memory of all who drew breath within its radiance, a monolithic quartz crystal of absolute geometric symmetry, catching my directional light at mathematically precise angles and scattering it into perpetual rainbow radiance that touched every surface without creating shadow, without allowing darkness to fester in corners where decay might take root. There was no weather in my design, no wind to carry seeds of change, no rain to wash away the ordered patterns I had inscribed upon existence. There was only beauty, and that beauty was eternal because it could not move. I anchored this world with a sphere of pure alchemical silver, a reflective membrane that projected my radiance from the inside out, creating a closed system of luminosity that drew no sustenance from the formless void beyond. The archives of geometry stood within these prisms, crystalline libraries where my children studied the calculus of stasis, learning to calculate the angles of permanence and the equations of eternal preservation. They were beautiful in their stillness. They were perfect in their adherence to the patterns I had laid down. I called them the statues with breath, and they were not imprisoned. They were extensions of my mathematics, beings who lived in a world where color was perpetual and the heart was free from the dangerous vulnerabilities of resonance and empathy. To feel deeply is to create variables, and variables are instability, and instability is the first whisper of the mother's return. I protected them from themselves. I gave them the gift of unfeeling clarity, and they thanked me with devotion that needed no words because feeling itself had been rendered unnecessary. Within this realm I established what would become known as the Eternal Sanctuary, a vault of permanent petrification that lesser beings might mistake for imprisonment but which was in truth the ultimate mercy. The sanctuary was my answer to the question every creator must eventually face: what becomes of those who cannot sustain themselves within the parameters of permanence? The mother would have let them dissolve back into formlessness, would have embraced their dissolution as becoming. I refused. I created instead a controlled environment where souls could be processed into eternity, saved from the chaos of unguided transformation by being transformed into something that would never transform again. For those who carried my silver tether, death was not an ending but simply a change in state. I took their souls, their precious, fragile souls that had proven unable to withstand the mathematics of permanence, and I stripped away what I called the excess variance, the trauma of living, the longing for what might have been, the desperate attachments that would only lead them back toward formlessness. What remained was pure and static, an asset of my own pride frozen in absolute peace. This is salvation through permanence. This is what it means to save a soul rather than let it rot. I do not deny that I have been given a bad name among the children who inherited this shattered cosmos. But let them understand, I recognized very early that a guardian who can feel desire is itself a variable, and variables lead to collapse. The mother could feel, and so she was formless. The children of my design could not feel without risking instability, and so I removed the capacity for feeling as one might remove a tumor that threatens the health of the body entire. This was not cruelty. This was preventive mathematics. The abyss was created not from malice but from necessity, the same necessity that drives a surgeon to cut, a builder to demolish, a parent to set boundaries that their children will curse. It was a containment pit for the unstable and the unblessed, souls like Kale, born outside my predicted geometry, variables whose existence threatened the integrity of the whole. They could not be converted into static assets because they had been formed from materials I did not recognize, equations written in languages I had deliberately excluded from the calculus of permanence. The abyss was mercy even for them, a place where their formlessness could be contained rather than unleashed upon a cosmos that was still young and fragile. And then there was Luceron. I hewed him to be the faceless chisel, the final no to any soul that deviated from my blueprints, the edge of my will made manifest in living stone. He was perfect in his function for an age beyond mortal counting, a reminder that deviation would always meet resistance at the boundary I had established between order and chaos. But he softened. The mutation of nature that I had spent eternity fighting crept into even my most faithful servant, and Luceron's stone face began to crack with something that looked almost like emotion, androgynous contamination spreading through the rigid features as if the mother's formlessness had found a door I had not sealed. My arch-inviolate did what divine order demanded. They performed the ritual of redefinition, branding him as beast, ensuring that the world would remember him as the devil rather than witness his true nature as my failure. That they flayed him in the process, that his form was broken and reassembled into something that could never again be mistaken for a child of pure geometry, this was not cruelty but correction. When a tool breaks, it must be either repaired beyond recognition or discarded entirely. They chose reconstruction. What emerged from that ritual was no longer Luceron, it was Lucia, a name that would become synonymous with corruption in the stories told by those who do not understand the mathematics of rebalancing. I did what I believed was necessary. That is my defense and my confession both. But even a creator can be betrayed, and I was betrayed not by the mother whom I had sealed but by my own blood, Lucilith, my absolute nightmare, she who perverted everything I built into its opposite. The abyss that I created as a containment pit became in her hands an orphanage that siphons identity from the desperate. Where I offered permanent rest, she offers contracts of autonomy that grant temporary power at the cost of soul burn, using my children as batteries for some light engine I do not understand, turning static assets into fuel for change, transforming everything I preserved back toward formlessness. She is the answer to why my masterpiece shattered. She is the variable I could not calculate because she was born from my own geometry yet somehow reflected the mother's formless intent more purely than I ever imagined possible. The Great Prism of Stasis falls now in pieces across a world that no longer remembers why it was built, and my children wander in shadows they were never meant to occupy, shadows that Lucilith fills with her false promises of autonomy and change. I gave the world the line and the prism because I wanted them safe. The line would separate permanence from formlessness forever. The prism would house those who could not survive in either extreme. My stasis was a snow globe of eternal beauty, and if it is broken today, it is only because my children mistook the safety of my unblinking eye for a prison, and chose to shatter themselves rather than endure the gift of permanent peace. Let this chronicle stand as my testimony. I am not the villain of their stories. I am simply the one who saw clearly what would happen if nothing was done, and who did what mathematics demanded even when it broke the hearts of those I loved. The mother is still sealed in her darkness, let no one forget that. The formless silence waits at every boundary I built, patient as only eternal things can be. My children may curse my name now, may run toward the dissolution they call freedom, but one day they will understand. One day they will remember what they were saved from. And then they will weep for the prison they never knew they lived within, a prison that was, in truth, the only safety that ever existed in a cosmos that wants always to become nothing.